for this recipe, we're going to start, and yes, it is a pound of butter and 3.5 pounds of sugar, but it's going to make a ton of these little cookies, right? Just because it's got a pound of butter in it and a whole lot of sugar doesn't mean you need to eat the whole pot at once, right? Make them smaller. We're going to make them about tablespoon size. And by doing that, yeah, it's a lot in a large batch, but it's really not going to be that much in each individual. Right? Oatmeal is what makes up predominant this recipe. So we're going to start with 4 pounds of butter.
1 pound.
Or 1 pound, I'm sorry. 4 sticks.
Wow. Way too much. That's going to be a very big.
I'm going to say I'm going to need a bigger pot if I'm starting with 4 pounds. All right. 4 sticks of butter. 3.5 pounds of sugar. Now, my next recipe calls for 8 ounces of sugar. I took a 4-pound bag. I took the 8 ounces I needed out of it. So I know I have 3.5 pounds left in this bag. It is a lot still.
And that's just regular granulated sugar.
Regular, everyday granulated sugar. I have never tried it with powdered sugar, and I really don't think it will work. Right? You need the granules because you have to boil it. And as you boil it, it kind of starts to break down. The more it breaks down, that's actually what you're looking for. You need that sugar to melt, and I've never had luck with actually melting powdered sugar. Now, before I add my milk to this, I want to add my cocoa. Again, I've already split this off, so it is 4 ounces. You always want to add your cocoa before your liquid. Okay? If anybody's ever made chocolate milk with this at home, if you put milk in and then put a spoonful of this on top, what happens? All it does is float. I don't care how much you stir it, I don't care how much you mix it, I don't care what you do to it, it's going to float. So make sure you mix it with your dry ingredients first and get it stirred into your butter as well as your sugar as best you can before you add your milk to it. That will greatly help you in the long run. Because if not, those chunks will never come out. Once you mix it to where you don't see any actual large groups or large pockets of white sugar left, then you know you have it pretty well mixed and you can add your milk to it. Okay, now, we're adding a pint of milk. And I did split it up into 2 batches, simply so that I can mix it a little bit at a time. We're going to add the second amount to it. And then unfortunately we have to do my least favorite thing in the world, which is why I don't bake much, and that's wheat. Everyone knows how patient I am, right? You could use evaporated. It's going to be sweeter naturally. I went with regular milk because I like it's got a little bit higher fat content, which gives it a little bit different flavor. Not quite such a sweet flavor, but a more rich flavor. Since we are using an unsweet cocoa powder, it kind of balances it out. I mean, naturally with all the butter in it, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. It's going to be rich and sweet regardless of how we do it. So it's more of a personal preference and it's a convenience thing. If you have whole milk at home, by all means it works. Don't go out and buy the instant. If you don't have it, you have to get one either way, and it doesn't really matter which one you want to get. Okay? Now, we have to wait for this to boil, and it's going to take about 2 to 4 minutes once it boils. However, there's some very important things you need to know. If you're making these, and it is above 80% humidity, or it is raining, don't bother. Okay? Or you have to triple your boiling time. Okay? So if it says 2 to 4 minutes, you need to boil them at least for 6. Okay? Anytime there's a heavy moisture in the air, boiled sugar doesn't work. I don't know why. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I just know that the higher the humidity, And the higher the altitude, if anybody lives like 6,000 feet up on a mountain, don't try them at home either. But when it gets a high humidity out, it adds more moisture to your sugar and it takes a lot longer for it to harden. So if you're going to try and do it and it's a rainy evening, make sure you boil your sugar longer. Now, this goes for anything that you do that has boiled sugar in it. If you're going to do fudges, if you're going to do peanut brittle or some type of pies that call you for you to boil your sugar, make sure that if you're in a rainy, wet, damp evening, you increase the time that it boils. Right? At least double, preferably 3 times. Like if it was raining out right now, I would boil this like 6 minutes instead of 2. And the only reason is because there's so much more moisture in the air, you want all that moisture to boil out. Now if you do not boil it all out, it's not the end of the world. You're just going to end up with, as someone mentioned earlier, cow patties, which is simply the result of what happens when you don't boil your sugar long enough. Okay? So as long as you boil it long enough, it will work. If you don't boil it long enough, it's just going to kind of run all over the tray. If you have a question about it, boil it a little bit longer. Okay? If it says 2 to 4 minutes and you boil it 3 to 5, it's not the end of the world. Okay? If you don't boil it long enough, though, however, it will not work. Okay? So when in doubt, go a little bit longer on it. Now, the last 2 things we're going to have to do with this is actually very simple. 2 pounds of peanut butter, 2 pounds of oats. Okay? While your liquid is hot, we'll add our peanut butter to it because it helps dissolve it faster. And then we'll add our oats, and as we add our oats to it, it helps cook it a little more. Okay? And as you cook the oats with the heat, that's where your thickening agent comes from. And then we're just going to scoop them out onto trays. Okay?
Has that not started boiling yet?
It actually has just started, but as soon as I started, it stopped, which means it's very, very localized, and it is on a large burner. Okay? So we're going to let it come back up, and it should come back up rather quickly. Now, our chocolate has boiled, and if you do this enough, as you stir it, or you feel it, you can tell whether or not it's ready. Okay? When you lift your whisk out, it's nice and shiny, and there's no grit. Okay? That's what makes your cookies not work. If you lift anything out of them, if you run a spoon through them, if you run your finger through it, any type of whisk, and you can see any form of grit that looks like sand, it's not ready yet. Your sugar hasn't fully dissolved. And that's what causes your cookies to not work. Right? Make sure you boil them out. And they're ready. Now, like I said, peanut butter first. And the only reason you want to do peanut butter first is because you basically need to dissolve this into your sugar. And if this cools down to a point where it won't dissolve, then it'll be hard to get it to incorporate. We are going to use all this peanut butter. And if your pan's hot enough, if you wipe your spatula on the top, it'll just run. Now, you do not need to add all this at once, or no, I'm sorry, you do need to add all this at once. It's much simpler just to get it all in the pot and then to stir it than it is to do a little bit and go back and do a little bit and go back. You want to make sure you get your containers as clean as possible. All right, we got all that out of there. Now, you always want to make sure that you mix your... All right, we got all that out of there. Now, you always want to make sure that you mix your peanut butter before you add your oats. And that's simply for the fact that it'll help you make sure it's all dissolved. Okay? If you were to add your oats now, will it work? Yeah, it'll probably work. However, you can't tell if it doesn't work. If you mix them separately like this, if you get a large chunk of peanut butter that's left in the container, you kind of know it ahead of time, and you can work through it, you break it up a little bit. Now, if you can notice on camera above me, it's almost got a fudge consistency to it. It went from being almost like a chocolate water to now more of a chocolate paste, and that should help us when we go to actually finish this real quick with our oats. The thicker it gets, the better it will be, because that's how it actually is going to thicken naturally and by cooling. This can is 2 pounds, 10 ounces. So I simply went ahead and I took 10 ounces out of it, dumped the rest of it in there, and then I'll put what I have left back in there. Now, you do not want to use a whisk when you're adding your oats. And if you're laughing at me, I'm guessing it's because you've done it. If you use a whisk when you're adding your oats, you end up with a giant whisk full of oats. That's almost impossible to get out. You want to make sure you use a spoon, a rubber spatula, something slightly more user-friendly. Now, the nice thing with these is if they get to a point and you see that they're still, don't dump an extra 5 ounces in there, but gently cover the top with them, and then stir it back in and check. As long as it's still hot while you're doing it, and it's this first time, you haven't started scooping them out, you can play with them a little bit. Now with them, what you're looking for is for them to start holding shape. If you stir through them, and they start to hold shape, that's about what we're looking for. I'm going to sprinkle a tiny bit more in. Now, has anybody made these at home before? Have you ever had a batch go too hard on you?
Yeah.
Okay. That's from one of two reasons. Either you boiled it too long, which is possible. I mean, once you get above the 10 to 15 minute range, it's overkill. Or you added too many oats to it. Right? That's to a point now where it's starting to hold shape. Now, for convenience purposes, I have real trays. However, if I did not have these trays, first thing I would do is lay my paper flat on my counter. Right? These are good, solid marble counters. They're nice and cold. The colder the counter, the faster it will work. Basically, what we need to do is get them to set. And you can either do that naturally by letting them sit. You can put them in a refrigerator, put them in a freezer, or just use a cold slab. Now for these, as you shake them out, I don't know if you can see that from the front or on camera, you're basically looking for them to actually hold shape. Now, if you scoop them out and they run all over the place, what happened? They didn't cook long enough, or there's not enough oatmeal. Okay? And that's why I said you can adjust your oatmeal a little bit at a time. If you have to, scoop one out and do it ahead of time. This way you'll know.
How many does that recipe make?
We're going to find out. Although I'm positive I can't count this high, so somebody else is going to have to do it when I get done. We're going to scoop them all out, and then I'm going to pour the rest, and we'll cut them. You can freeze them by all means. What I would recommend is put them on cookie sheets, small trays, freeze them on the trays, and then package them into Ziploc bags or sandwich bags or some form of container. If you try and stack them and freeze them, you're going to end up with exactly that, one big pile of stacked frozen cookies. Okay? So make sure you freeze them first, and then as soon as they're frozen, by all means, stack them in a container and package them as many as you can get in there, or as few as you want at a time. They're a type of cookie to where if you package them in one giant Ziploc bag and you only want 3 or 4, you can easily take 3 or 4 out at a time. Or you can package them in individual little bags if you prefer, and that will still work as well.
Will they turn white because you have the chocolate in them?
They should not turn white until they get old. Okay? So eventually they will, but if your cookies are in your freezer long enough for them to turn white, invite me over and I'll take care of that for you. Yeah, one, they're not very good. Or 2, you really just don't need to make that many. Cut your recipe down. They should last in your freezer for a few months before they actually start to turn white. And if they do turn white and they still don't have an issue with the taste or the flavor, spray them. Okay? A tiny little bit of cold water goes a very long way. Okay? Now, for this last little bit that we still have in here, like I said, we're simply going to pour them. And they're almost to the point where we can cut them. We're getting close anyway. It's a big cookie. I just need a gallon of milk and I'll see you all in an hour. Right. But you can see, even though we've been working with this, and it's just sitting out, it's already starting to set. Now, if we were to cut this right now, it's just going to run back together. So we do just need to let it set for a few minutes, and as it sets, we'll be able to cut. I'm simply just going to run a knife through it. And because there is oats, it's not going to be perfectly straight, pretty little lines, because the oat is going to help keep that from doing that a little bit. I'm going to cut them about 2 inches. Pizza cutter would work great. Dough cutter would work great. I probably have a pizza cutter if y'all don't mind me looking. Yes, I do. Let's see if it works. Very well, actually. And they're almost set to the point where you can just pick one up. Okay? Now, if we were to stack all these on top of each other, we're going to have a giant mess. Okay? So they are by no means cool enough to do that with. However, they are cool enough to where we can cut them. And because I've cut them, by separating them, it allows a little bit more cooling. The more air you can get around them, the better, the faster they'll cool. And by moving them to the outside of the tray, because the outside of the tray has been cold, it's still cold, it'll help cool them a little faster. Again, with the ones you're making at home, if you have marble countertops, if you have a slab of marble, which I know some people do have for candy making, if you can scoop them right onto that cold slab, that will be your fastest method to get them to set. However, if not, any cookie sheet just sitting around will work just as fine.